Sean start the show here, okay?
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. There's still a few people trickling in, but I'll say a few words there, just get a few housekeeping matters out of the way. First of all, thank you for everybody attending tonight. This is our second Zoom presentation in as many weeks. The first one was on Vendée Globe, a very entertaining presentation, and we have another great one for tonight. We have Sean Johnston talking about his trip around the world. So that's going to be great. As far as if Renee also already mentioned, if you could please keep things on mute, be much appreciated. If you could also keep your video on for people that want to ask questions, please do so through the chat, and we'll try to answer those throughout the presentation. If there's too many questions, we're going to push some of those back to the towards the end of the presentation. Okay.
Could I say one thing, Ron?
Yeah.
During the presentation, it would actually be better if people turned off their video, because the video takes up a lot of bandwidth and it can affect the streaming of the presentation. Like
okay,
it can cause internet connection issues, you know, because audio is okay, but I mean, you want people muted. But if everyone's on video, all the participants, it's going to eat up a lot of bandwidth and create streaming issues.
Okay. Yeah, like I mean, we had everybody was on our last presentation. We had quite a few people attending that, and it seemed to come out fine. So if it does turn out to be a problem, what we can do is we'll do that.
Yeah, because different people, not everybody might have a streaming issue. It depends on what your internet speed is at. But just to let you know, the video does take up a lot of bandwidth.
Right. Okay. Cool.
Sorry. Happy New Year, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, Heather.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah, got a couple more people trickling in here. So yeah, this is a two-part presentation. The first one's going to be on preparation about traveling around the world. And the second one is going to be more of a travel log and getting into more of the particular destinations that Sean and Carolyn hit as they made their way around the world. Just to give you a little intro on Sean before he gets into his presentation. Sean first learned how to sail on the Ottawa River and first participated racing on Albacores in the east end of Ottawa at Ottawa New Edinburg Club. That was in 1974.
That's where we were.
And after that, Sean continued to hone and improve his seamanship skills by racing on keelboats at the Britannia Yacht Club from 1975 to 1983, and doing most of his sailing here on Lac du Chêne and upriver as far as Quillan. And at the end of 1983, Sean felt it was time to embark on his dream of sailing around the world. And first step was to quit his job and put in his notice in 1983. And then he headed over to England to purchase his boat and outfit it before circumnavigating the world, which he did between 1984 and 1992. And today you can still find Sean back in his home waters at Britannia Yacht Club, sailing on Lac du Chêne and up the river on the same boat that he sailed around the world on Spalpeen. So I'll let he'll talk a little bit more about his boat and why he chose that boat. So anyways, I'm going to turn the floor over to Sean. Really looking forward to this presentation. I think it's really, really cool, the fact that somebody here from Ottawa who got primarily most of their experience on the Ottawa River has embarked on this trip and successfully, made it around the world and back home again. So
but that was like 30, that's only 40 years ago.
So, Anyway, there's still some people that are not on mute. So if I can just get you to,
Are we on mute?
and I'm going to turn the floor over to Sean. Sean, it's all yours.
Okay, good evening, everybody. So the first slide is a map of the world. This is the voyage I undertook, starting in England, down into the Med, across the Atlantic, through Panama, down across the Pacific to New Zealand. New Zealand's over on the right-hand side now. Then up and through the islands and over to Australia, up the Australian coast, back over to Vanuatu, to Papua New Guinea, Philippines, to Hong Kong down to Singapore, Indonesia, across the Indian Ocean to Mauritius, down to Durban, round to Cape Town, South Africa, and then across the South Atlantic to St. Helena, Brazil, and up to the Caribbean, and eventually ending in Houston. So that was 9 years. Now, the idea of going sailing occurred to me at age 30. I went out on a friend's sailboat on Lake Ontario. I was actually living in Toronto at the time. And when I left Ireland, I had the idea that I would go see the world by working in different places. And I figured 2-3 years and I'd hop from England to Australia to, Hong Kong to wherever. And that worked well for the first jump. I went to England, spent 3 years there, and then came to Canada and kind of got stuck. So at age 30, when I learned a little bit about sailing, and I thought, well, this is probably a more practical way of seeing the world. So I decided that I was going to buy a boat and I was going to learn to sail and take off for a couple of years. Being somewhat naive, I thought a couple of years would be plenty, and it really isn't. Anyway, I came to Ottawa, started sailing here at Ottawa New Edinburg, and I put in place a very loose 10-year plan. And the amazing thing was that for the next 10 years, I actually stuck quite well to that plan. I certainly tried to do things that forwarded the plan, and I avoided doing things that regressed the plan in any way. And then after 10 years, I had enough money and enough skills that I figured I was ready and quit my job with Cognos, and I went off looking for a boat. And I'd love to do it again. Now, in terms of the overall plan, there's a number of aspects to it. First thing is, if you want to do something like this, you need a financial plan. And the easiest route to do that is buy a house, pay it off, and then sell it. And you should have enough money. If you buy a house in Ottawa, a small house, you'll have enough money to buy a boat and sail it for a few years. So that was basically the approach I took. And I tried to maximize my revenue as opposed to minimizing expenses. If you're ever saving for anything, that's the way to do it. The next aspect of planning it was to figure out, had to learn to sail. So I set about, I didn't want to buy a boat because I really couldn't afford one. So I learned to race on other people's boats, initially on Albacores and then on a CNC 35 and various other race boats of Sal Khan. for a few years. The things you need to learn are coastal navigation, not so much celestial navigation. That's really quite unnecessary now with the tools we have, GPS and the like. But you certainly need to become proficient at coastal navigation. That's really where all the danger lies, is when you're traveling along coasts, whether they be sea or the Ottawa River. A real key to that is learning to look at heights, not depths. Anytime you're trying to place yourself on a chart, look on the chart, find the highest peak, and then scan the horizon, find that peak. And it immediately tells you pretty well exactly where you are. The other thing you need to do is you need to become a real handyman. You need to know your plumbing, you need to know electrics, you should learn about engine maintenance, not just diesel engine maintenance. You'll need outboard engine maintenance as well. Hull maintenance, rigging, tuning rigging, etc. Then the last section is developing a plan. What do you need in a boat? And I'll get to that in a minute. And the last aspect of the overall planning is, as soon as you've got everything in place, and you've accumulated the money, you've accumulated the skills, you know what you're doing, then go. A lot of people at this stage kind of waffle a little. Should I quit my job now, or wait another 2 years or whatever? You'd be amazed at how many of them come unstuck in that extra year or 2 years that they wait. Life tends to intervene. Okay, the boat. People do this in all kinds of boats. Tiny little things to massive things, flimsy to extremely strong. There is no perfect boat to do it in. I chose to get an extremely strong boat. I would recommend anyone going offshore with 2 people as crew, stick to 35 to 45 foot. Anything lower than that smaller than that tends to be uncomfortable. And anything larger than that, you won't be able to handle with 2 people, particularly when it gets to docking. You need a comfortable liveaboard boat. This thing is going to be your house. And you're going to end up probably, if you're going to try and circumnavigate, it's going to take you a minimum of 5 years in all probability. So you have to get a boat that you're going to be comfortable living on for 5 years. Going offshore cruising is not like going camping. You're stuck. You need certain level of comfort and accommodation. You need a boat with large storage capacity. Typically, in cruising, particularly in the South Seas, you're going to need to be able to load up 6 months worth of stores on board your boat. The boat should either be heavy displacement, or if it's a light displacement, it needs to be a lot larger. You can't put all this junk onto a small light displacement boat. You'll make it dangerous and damned uncomfortable. And you need a motor range of at least 500 miles, because there are parts of the world where you'll just have to motor, depending on the season. Sails.
Hey, Sean. Sean, we have one question that just came in here with regards to your choosing a a boat, and that is, do you have any thoughts on a monohull versus a multi-hull catamaran boat, for example?
I don't have any fixed opinions on them. I have friends that have traveled on multi-hulls. My one caution with multi-hulls have the advantages that are a lot faster, so you can get out of the way of bad weather. You can make passages faster. You're less at risk to bad weather, but you want one that can still, survive in bad weather. So they need to be sturdy, no matter what kind of boat you get. The bad thing in terms of circumnavigation about a multi-hull is the cost of docking and the ability to dock. If you go to the Med, there is no anchoring. Everywhere in the Med that you would think of dropping an anchor was turned into a harbor 2 centuries ago, or two millennia ago. So it's not terribly practical to use catamarans in places like the Med, or really anywhere in Europe. The people I know that have had success with them have mainly enjoyed going across the Pacific, where everything is anchor, very few marinas, and it works well there. That's about it for boats. As I say, people have done this in all kinds of boats. When I crossed, excuse me. When I crossed the Atlantic, I did it single-handed in my 40-footer, and I got in. I felt really, really proud and cock a hoop at doing it all by myself for 24 hours, and then the following day, I watched as a Norwegian guy sailed in, or actually rowed in a 17-foot sloop. And he rowed in because he didn't have an engine. He had 2 sweeps. The sweeps looped over the cockpit winches, little winches, and he rowed into Antigua Harbor. You can do it safely in just about any size of boat, any type of boat, as long as it's well found. The difference is in your level of comfort and accommodation. Anyway, back to where I was. Sails, furling jennies. Regardless of what kind of boat you have, put a furler on the forestay. It's make sure it's a heavy duty one, but put one on. They are very, very useful as an emergency sail. You're coming into harbor and your engine dies on you, and it does. You can deploy your genoa and get some movement out of the boat, keep you off the rocks. Mainsail should have 3, possibly 4 reefs in the main. I had 4. I used the 4th reef once, and that was in the Bay of Biscay. But you want to have lots of reefs, and you want to be able to put them in very easily. I was smart enough to rig for single handing because I was going to single hand parts of it. But I would suggest that everyone rig their boat for single handing, because the more you can, if you're traveling with your companion, the more you can let them get a good sleep, the more they'll let you get a good sleep, and it'll make it a lot more, passages a lot more pleasant. Heavy weather foresail, I actually rigged a staysail on the foredeck that I used when I was anticipating heavy weather. It also was on a furler. But if you do that, you need to reinforce the where you tack the sail so it doesn't rip out. And you probably also need to put on running backstays to support the mast. If you don't, you run the risk of metal fatigue in your mast, presuming it's aluminum, and catastrophic failure. Spinnakers are useful to have, but they're not useful on passages. They're only of use really in inshore sailing. At sea, typically at sea, you've got 6-foot waves all the time. Very seldom you get anything less than that. And a spinnaker or even a cruising gennaker, it's a pain in the neck. It'll just collapse and fill, bang, bang, bang. They're not very practical. Plus, if anything goes wrong, they're an awful big sail to put away quickly. You need a whisker pole. Storm jib and trysail are traditional sails. I actually did without them, but read up on them and make your own decision on that. The other thing you're going to need is lots of spare blocks and spare sheets so that you can adjust your all your running rigging to avoid chafe. What works around on the Ottawa River or Lake Ontario in terms of chafe may not be terribly effective when you get into real waves. You don't want to be blowing your Genoa sheets or your whatever main sheets or whatever. They got to last you a long way. Rigging. Sloop, cutters, yawls, catches, or catamarans. I don't like trimarans, but I have seen and been on some fabulous cruising catamarans, so I like them. The other boat, sloops are simple, cutters are slightly more complex. My boat was a sloop, but I rigged it as a cutter, putting in a staysail, but I ran the boat more as a sloop. I only used both the Genoa and the staysail when going downwind, and I refer you back to the photo earlier. You'll see where is it? There. So the sail on the right, I adapted and put onto a stay on the. It became a staysail instead of a Genoa, and that worked very well because the flow of the air came in on the staysail, looped around, and then exited through the gap between the staysail and the Genoa. Originally, I tried having both sails on the same forestay, and that left no gap between the two sails. And that worked very, very poorly. Both sails ended up being stalled, collapsing a lot, banging a lot, and not giving very good speed. But if you put up two sails, in this case, this is loose luft, it works a lot better. So back to the rigging. You want to have spare rigging wire, probably enough for enough for a backstay would be ideal. And you also need to have Norseman fittings to actually use on that spare rigging wire in emergencies. Mast steps. If you're going offshore, you're going to cruise in the tropics, you absolutely have to have mast steps. And I would say at a very minimum, they should take you up to the first set of spreaders. And the reason I say that is mainly for visibility, reading the water in the tropics. If you've ever cruised in the Caribbean, you'll know that between 10 in the morning and 2 or 3 in the afternoon, you can tell exactly what the depth of the water is everywhere just by looking at the color of it. If you're making passages, sometimes it's not practical to actually arrive at your destination before 3 o'clock. Now, if you start coming in at 4 o'clock, you won't be able to read a damn thing, okay, from the deck. But if you go up to the spreaders, okay, you have at least an extra hour, probably more like an hour and a half, where you can read the water. That's the arrangement we used for the second half of our journey after I got mast steps put on. Carolyn used to take over the helm, running under motor, coming into anchorage, and I'd go up and sit in the mast at the spreaders and just use a little walkie-talkie to tell her which direction to go and how fast, slow down, 10 degrees to starboard, 15 degrees to port. You can read all of the shallow spots really easily. Next, you need to have they call them jibe preventers. I don't really like that name. Really what you need is a jibe controller. You don't want to prevent jibes. Jibe preventers will stop a jibe. And then when you need to jibe, you're kind of at risk, okay? You put the helm over and you've taken the jibe preventer off, and the boom comes swinging over. I had a very heavy boom on my boat, and that could not be allowed. So I put a jibe controller on with a thing called a Walder. There are others, one called boom brake. But basically, you want something that helps you slow the actual jibe process down. Next, running backstays. If you're using a storm sail in a storm stay sail, you'll need running backstays. If you can avoid them, great. But if you're using a stay sail, you'll have to have them. You need self-steering or an auto helm or both. Engine. You need a low-tech diesel. You want to have something reliable that has parts available worldwide and has mechanics that know the workings of them. You should learn basic maintenance of engines, but you're unlikely to become an expert in diesel mechanics unless you take specific courses. So get yourself something that, like a Yanmar, a Perkins, or a Volvo, that are in use you pull into any fishing port anywhere in the world, and you'll find that all three of those engines are being used, and there's somebody around that knows how to fix them. Keeping your fuel clean is really important. So you want to have at least 2 water separator filters on the fuel line. And you also need to carry lots of conditioners. In the tropics, diesel fuel is prone to attacks from, what is it, a fungus and a virus, I think it is. Was it? Bacteria. And either of them can turn your fuel into jelly. So you want to, and it's a combination of the heat and contaminants in the fuel you take on. So you want to avoid that. It's a terrible curse if you get hit by either of those. So take precautions. Be careful. Filter your fuel in questionable places, and use lots of fuel conditioner. You need to have a good cooling water pump, and you need to filter it very well. You obviously should carry the list of spare parts, the recommended spare parts, and then there's the propellers, fixed or folding. You don't want to have the 2-blade folding prop that a lot of the racing boats use. They're terrible. You want a 3-bladed prop, and preferably a folding 3-bladed prop, so that you've got good performance from your engine when you stick it in reverse. Mooring and anchoring. You want to have lots of fenders on both sides of the boat. When you come into a port, you're coming in, you haven't seen it, you don't know where you're going to be. You can't be running around trying to move your fenders from one side to the other at the last minute. So have enough to put fenders on one side and the other, and adjust after you get in. Windlass, you absolutely need some kind of electric or hydraulic windlass, not a manual windlass. In the South Pacific, you're going to be anchoring in very deep waters at times. At one point, I was anchored in an island in French Polynesia called Taha, and the reading on my depth gauge was 105 feet. So if you have to pull up a 45 or 60 pound anchor and 240 feet of chain off a bottom that's 100 feet deep, you will die trying to do it manually. It's just not practical. Anchors, you're going to need 3. You need a main anchor, you need a secondary anchor, and you need a kedging anchor. Kedge being the kind of anchor that you can small, but you can put 10 feet of chain on and 150 feet of rope on it and get it into your dinghy and go 100 feet off to one side, drop it, and then heel your boat over on to get you off a reef. Won't happen very often, but when you need it, you need it. I had 3 anchors. I used two CQRs and 1 Danforth. If I was doing it again, I'd stick with the 2 CQRs as the main and primary, and I'd change the Danforth for a small Bruce. Chain, you have to have lots of chain. I had 240 feet on the primary, 80 feet on the secondary, and 30 feet on the kedge. You should have bow rollers, definitely on the bow, and a stern roller if you can. If you're going to go through Panama, then you're going to need 4 100-foot ropes as mooring lines going through. Yeah, 2 of them can be the rods for the secondary anchor and the kedging anchor. I'd also recommend a sea anchor of some kind, sea brake. There were a number of them built about the time I was cruising, and I had one which was a plastic cone that basically acted as a brake. I believe there are now canvas versions of those that are available, and I would say they're an excellent addition. Anchors is something you need to research, you need to become familiar with, and you will become an expert when cruising people get together. Anchors is always a discussion. So you'll talk for hours and hours and hours and hours about anchors, with people telling you their performance of this and the performance of that. So just to keep up with the conversation, do some research on anchors. Okay, so galley. Galley is a very important part of the boat. And as I mentioned earlier, you're probably going to end up living on board this boat. It's your house for the next 5 years, maybe 10, maybe 15. You need something that works for you. We had a 4-burner propane stove with an oven, and on one occasion actually cooked a 20-pound turkey in it. You need gas alarms. Barbecue on the stern is absolute must. Regardless of what kind of stove you have. In the tropics, you really don't want to be heating up down below all the time cooking. So getting to cook a lot of your food on the barbecue is a real advantage in keeping the down below livable. Fridges and freezers. Freezers are excellent. There's various eutectic 12-volt propane-driven 240 volt when you're in harbor, and I say that on purpose. Most of the world is 240 volt, not 110. So if you're going to rig for shore power, make sure it adapts to 240. And you know, there's a a school of thought that says don't bother with fridges. All they do is break down and ruin all your food. And there's an element of truth to that. But I never did see the point in sailing around the world if you can't have a cold beer while you're doing it. Inverters are certainly useful. Provisioning. You need a galley that can hold supplies. And typically, when you say in the Pacific, you get to some part of civilization and you load up with food at an inexpensive place, and you buy enough for 6 months, and then you cruise to the end. The provisioning, you need to have enough food on for about half of the meals you're going to have. The other half you're going to get probably supplement with fish you catch and stuff you buy locally when you get to the islands. Chicken is readily available everywhere. Pork is quite readily available. Beef is not so available. Some places you can get it, other places you can't. So have enough food for about half of your main meals for the coming 6-month cruise. You need to be able to organize your food into lockers, and lots of boats have nice big lockers. You can't just stack the cans and the pasta and the rice and all of that into lockers. You need to be able to put them into smaller baskets that you can pick up and take out and get at the basket underneath to make it easy on life. Safety equipment. First piece of safety equipment, high lifelines. Lots of sailboats around the Ottawa area. You step on board, you back up against a lifeline, and it's catching you just about the knees. Well, if you're on a boat on the high seas and you get a wire running behind your knees, you're in great jeopardy. So you want to have them a lot higher than your knees if you want to stay on board. Jack lines. Jack lines, they're a steel wire that runs from the bow to the stern. And you want it unimpeded. It's attached at the bow and attached at the stern and attached nowhere else. You clip your harness onto it, and you want to be able to literally run from the front of the boat to the back of the boat with your life, with your line attached to it. You need to have a stern boarding ladder. Initially, when I bought my boat, it had a boarding ladder that clipped onto the side of the boat. I changed that in New Zealand. Stern boarding ladder is really important if you ever fall overboard. Side ones are not very practical at all. So that's that. Radar reflector, you want boats to see you, but don't rely on radar reflectors. They're only good if the shipping around you actually has its radar on. And my experience is that a lot of times they don't. Man overboard systems to mark you, the flag, the life buoy, and the retrieval gear, something you can hook on to your boom and actually pull somebody back up on board. For all you heavy guys, think of your wife trying to get you back on board, or your girlfriend, or whoever. It's no good them just getting you alongside and you getting beaten up and assassinated by the hull of the boat hitting you. Emergency steering is important. The steering lines, the stainless steel or the metal cables that run steering systems do decay. You need to be able to steer the boat when one of them goes. Life raft is nice. I'll get to life raft in a minute. If you're going to have to abandon ship, you need to have a grab bag. This is a bag you put some emergency supplies in. We kept a small atlas, a VHF, handheld VHF, some extra water, and a few bags of nuts, and a couple of reflective blankets. Very, very useful if you have to survive sinking. Water jugs. Typically, you'll probably end up with a couple of water jugs on your deck as emergency. You fill them about 3/4 full so that if you have to jump ship, cut the water jugs loose and retrieve them after you're in your life raft. EPIRB is not a bad idea, but not necessarily a lifesaver. EPIRBs are an emergency signal radio beacon that you can set off. We had one experience in the Indian Ocean where a ship nearby set off its EPIRB, and it was one of the fancy new ones that use satellite, and their position was reported to the local search and rescue. The local search and rescue organization, though, was Madagascar. And they didn't actually have a search and rescue. So they set off their EPIRB. Yes, they were heard, they were logged, but nobody came to help. We ended up helping organize a rescue on that. Handheld VHF is very, very useful. It's useful for a couple of things. If you have to go overboard, it's nice to have something you can yell at ships. It's also useful if you're climbing the mast to read the waters from the spreaders and anchoring. And it's also useful when you go ashore. Or you drop your wife off ashore to do something and go back to the boat to work on it. And she calls you 2 hours later to come pick her up. Yeah. You need either a handheld VHF or some kind of walkie-talkie with a good, decent range. You should have something to get into if your boat is sinking. Some people think dinghies are the way to go. Other people believe in life rafts. The difference between them is primarily a dinghy, you have some means of propulsion, limited, but some. And the life raft, you have shelter. You pay your money and you take your chances. I ended up with both, and I would recommend both. Dinghy. A top class dinghy, the boat is your home for a few years, okay? The dinghy is your car, okay? And everything is driving distance away, okay? So you need a really good dinghy. And when I did it 30 years ago, inflatables were becoming all the rage. And most of them were crap. They lasted 2 years and then delaminated and were useless. You couldn't even sell them. You couldn't give them away. I bought an Avon Hypalon. That's in more, that fabric is in more widespread use now. So make sure you get a dinghy that's made of Hypalon if you're getting an inflatable. Your dinghy and your outboard make it possible for you to anchor more safely. If you're just using a little bun and rowing ashore, you're going to anchor within 100 yards of shore in 8 feet of water when you draw 5 feet. And when the wind turns around and the seas come in, your keel is going to be banging off the bottom, okay? And not only that, but you're going to be the inshore boat, and all the ones dragging from further out are going to be heading your direction. It's a lot safer to anchor. My rule was to try and anchor in 30 to 40 feet of water, okay? And if you've got a good dinghy, it's no problem. You zip in and out and it all works wonderfully. You need to have locks, though, to lock your dinghy to the dock. You lock your motor to the dinghy and you lock your gas tank to the dinghy. You might wonder about the gas tank, who'd steal the gas tank. Well, I only had mine stolen once, and that was by the gendarmerie in Martinique. Fortunately, we had met a young lady in Palau in the middle of the Pacific who was working at a charter company at the same dock. And when we saw her, we told her the story, and she just marched right into that gendarmerie office, and she tore a strip off these guys for about half an hour. And eventually they admitted, yes, they had stolen it and returned it. But I was very lucky to get it back. You need some way of lifting your boat on board. I had a 3-point harness on my dinghy. Other people use davits. I never liked davits. They're very convenient when you're in harbor, but it seems to me that they are a liability at sea. You're far better, safer storing your dinghy on deck, upside down, partially deflated, rather than having to hang out the back of the boat. I stored mine over the front of the front hatch, which gave the front hatch extra protection. So I turned the dinghy from an asset to an liability, I figure. Okay, next thing, living. Freshwater systems. You need to carry about 100 gallons of water, okay? Or about 30 gallons and a water maker. And the latter, I think, is the way to go nowadays. Regardless of which one you use, also get yourself a water catcher, just a piece of canvas or plastic that funnels down to a hose and you can attach to your water intake. Pressure water systems are, to me, a bit of a no-brainer. Some people do without them. If you do have a pressure water system, you do need still to have a hand pump or a foot pump. Because pressure water systems, the one I had, gave me problems for 6 months until I changed it. I bought a different brand. But you don't want to be stuck without water on a passage. So if the pressure water system fails, you need to be able to get water out of your tank still. We became big users of solar showers. It was a lot simpler showering in the cockpit with solar shower. And frankly, much more pleasant. On the water supply, we had a double filter system. One was a stainless steel mesh to take particulates out. And after that, the water passed through a charcoal filter. And that worked very well for us. If you don't have the mesh, then your charcoal filter can get clogged very quickly, particularly if you're using rainwater. The charcoal filter was also good at taking what was that bleach?
Chlorine bleach.
Well, no, it wasn't chlorine. Chlorine is a variation of chlorine. It was a medical chlorine product used to disinfect water. And you add a cupful of that to your load of water, and then the charcoal just strips that out completely, and you get very nice, fresh, good tasting water. Bug control. You're going to need mosquito nets for every port in the boat, bug sprays, fly swatters, and cockroach traps. You want to have plenty of cockroach traps. They will get aboard no matter what you do, okay? And what you want to do is ensure that there's a nice meal waiting for them when they arrive. And you want to change them out every 6 months or so. Just go strip out the old ones and throw them in the garbage and put a new set out. Make sure they're nice, fresh scented and ready to work. You need a dodger to try and keep yourself dry. Some kind of shade awning, a bimini or something you can rig to keep the sun off you. I didn't have a shade awning for the first couple of years of my trip. And as a result, I've had to have about 20 cancerous and precancerous items taken off my head and neck primarily. So be warned. Fishing gear, rods, reels, gaffs, and hooks. I use stainless steel hooks about 2 inches long. I used 80-pound lure. I wasn't terribly interested in giving the fish a chance. And I had a rod that went into a holder on the stern pulpit, and I changed that for a big reel that physically attached to the pulpit, and it worked wonderfully well. Much better than having a rod. A rod is a problem. You're up there on the back of the boat in 6-foot seas if it's a good day, and you're having to use one hand for the rod and one hand for the reel, and the boat's going up and down. I found it a lot easier having a reel actually attached on the stern pulpit. I held onto the stern pulpit and I wound in the reel. Occasionally I take my hand off, pull up the line, but I always had that hand ready to grab the rail. Last little tip here, jerry cans for fuel and water. Not sure how much you'll be using them nowadays. The world is a little more advanced, so probably end up lugging fuel and water to your boat a lot less than I had to. But the one thing I can tell you is you don't want to be using 5-gallon jugs. If you're carrying stuff, you want to have one in each hand, and 2 5-gallon jugs would mean you're carrying 200 pounds, more or less. It's okay if you're, taking the fuel from the pump to your dinghy that's tied up alongside the pump. But if it's coming from the local gas station, which is 300 yards from your boat, it becomes a problem. Getting 5-gallon drums or 5-gallon cans up onto your deck from the dinghy also isn't very easy. So stick to 3 gallons and you'll find it a lot more useful. Electronics. Nowadays you want to have 2 GPSs at minimum, one fixed on the boat and one mobile. Mobile one, there are lots available. VHF, again, fixed and mobile, one for the boat, one for going ashore or going up the mast. Depth sounder has to be able to operate down to 100 feet because you may not end up anchoring in 100 feet, but you certainly, if you go across the Pacific, you'll be anchoring in 50, 60, 80 feet, not that rarely. Radar, I didn't have radar. It's good for fog and haze. And you'd be surprised that in the tropics how much haze affects visibility. When we were approaching New Caledonia, which has hills on it probably 5,000 feet at least, we couldn't see that island. It's a big, big island. It's like, 80 miles long and 20 miles wide and 5,000, 6,000 feet high. And we couldn't see it until we were 10 miles off through the haze. Radio. There are 2 radio possibilities, SSB, single sideband, and ham. If you get a single sideband, then you want to get it clipped so that it picks up ham channels. If you get a ham radio, get it clipped so you can pick up the SSB channels. The importance of that was brought true to us again in the Indian Ocean when we helped rescue a boat that had broadcast on SSB and nobody responded, and we were the only one that heard them when they tried the ham. Water makers, very useful, very good idea now. They're reliable, and one of the things I like about them is they don't take a lot of room and they don't add a lot of weight. And they're one of the big problems with cruising is the amount of weight that you want to put on a boat. So if you can get rid of a few 100 pounds of tanks by having a wet water maker, that's great. And lastly, satellite phone would be something I would strongly consider. Satellite phone is nice to have to communicate home, and it's really good to have to communicate in an emergency. You know, the EPIRB is set off, but you never know what the effect is. Satellite phone, you can call somebody and they can call you back and tell you what's happening. 12-volt power and more power. Alternators, you need to have a heavy-duty alternator. I had an 80 amp alternator. I'd go 160 amp now. I also tried wind generator, prop shaft generator, and trailing generators. Wind generator with a hoist into the rigging. It continuously attacked me every time I tried to take it down. It was I didn't like it. Prop shaft generator was slightly more reliable, but it only worked on my boat when we were traveling at a good speed, like over 5 knots. My boat typically did 5 knots. When it was doing 6 knots, it was going really fast. And when it was doing 7 knots, you really didn't want to be on board. Trailing generators, I tried one of them. It was great at releasing fish that I caught on the fishing line. Solar panels, I put 5 of them on board the boat. They were excellent, really reliable. They don't give you as much power as it says on the label or the instruction manual, but it's reliable and it's zero maintenance. Batteries, you need to have deep cycle batteries. You need to have a good starting battery, and you need to be able to isolate the two. Some boats have diesel generators. Nowadays, I didn't have a diesel generator. I had a couple of little portable gas generators. Both of them died a death. When you need to generate electricity, sometimes the weather is inclement and they don't survive that very well. My advice would be get solar panels, not diesel generators. Planning a cruise. Basically, you plan a cruise by one season at a time, and a season is essentially 6 months. You know, so you sit down and you say, okay, here I'm here, and I want to be over there in 6 months. How do I get there? And you basically measure the time, measure the sailing days. My rule of thumb was I will do 100 miles a day at sea. So an 800 mile passage is going to take me a week. You know, so you determine where you are, where you're going, and the distance between. Then you look at the stops along the way. Where do I want to stop? How long do I want to stay there? Is it an interesting place to stop? Is it, or is it just, you know, a chance to get a good night's sleep? And then, having set out the whole range of the cruise, you want to be able to allocate some extra days. Okay, you're going to need them in reserve. A, for the times when you get to somewhere that's wonderful and you meet people you like, and you decide you want to spend an extra 3 or 4 days or a week or whatever. And you want to be able to do that without disrupting the overall cruise, because you still got to get to the end of that destination before hurricane season arrives. And you also need to allow for the fact that you may end up having to stop and fix things. So that sketches out your cruise for you. You might have thought before you set out that you can get away from schedules by going sailing, but unfortunately, the weather patterns of our world will not permit these. You have schedules. Lastly, get out of hurricane season early, not late. In my cruise, or our cruise, we ended up having to take some action on 6 different occasions due to hurricanes or cyclones, same thing. And in almost every case, those were either at the very start of the season, the end of the season, or not in the hurricane season at all. I went through the eye of a small hurricane in the Coral Sea in the middle of July or August. Absolutely the wrong time of year for a hurricane, but they still occur. Those things do not read the books. They don't know when they're supposed to occur. Books to read. If you're going to do this kind of cruising, the Bible would be Cruising Routes of the World. They help you plan what parts of the world you can get to from where at what time of year. Use it as the Bible. In terms of good sailing cruising books, Hiscock's books are all excellent. I found the Atlantic Crossing Guide was quite good. If you're crossing the Atlantic. Dashu's Circumnavigator's Handbook is good reading. Take along a good atlas, and a pictorial book of Canada is a real welcome addition to your onboard library. You'll end up with entertaining people on board your boat, and a lot of them want to know about where you come from. Having a little picture book that you can show them what Canada is like and what snow looks like and all of that is well worth having. And lastly, avoid authors with extreme views. You know, people that tell you they should do this without having an engine or without having, using oil lamps instead of electrical, et cetera, et cetera. They have some good points, some of them, but in general, unless you feel like recreating the kind of voyaging that people were doing 200 years ago, I don't see a reason to follow those guidelines. And lastly, golden rules of cruising, Sean's golden rules. Number 1, you jibe on Sundays. This applies particularly crossing the Atlantic or North or South Atlantic, even at times the Indian Ocean, possibly parts of the Pacific. You're going on long, long journeys, and a lot of times it's dead downwind, and you're going to be going slightly off to make your sails hang a little bit better. And so you do a crossing the Atlantic. Once you get down near the Azores, not the Azores, the Cape Verde Islands. Once you get there, you've got about a 3-week passage across to to the Caribbean, and it's all dead downwind. And you go for a week on one tack, jibe through about 10, 15 degrees, a week on the other, and then a week on the other, and you're there. Second rule, wherever you are in the world, it's their country. Abide by their rules, and for God's sake, stay out of their courts. If you think you can take some marina or yacht maintenance guy to court in their country and win some lawsuit, you are mistaken. Don't go there. Don't get into that mindset. I ran into a few people, mainly American, that tried it, and all of them got their comeuppance. And lastly, last rule, gentlemen don't beat. They stay in harbor until the wind changes. Beating is the pain in the ass. It's to be avoided. You can pretty well go all the way around the world and not have to beat if you're smart. Cruising boats, loaded cruising boats, do not go to windward well. You're talking about something that typically will point about 50 degrees to the wind. And if there's any kind of seaway, you're making 10 degrees of leeway. So you're doing 60 degrees to wind. You're going like this. And if there's a current against you, you just end up going like this. So avoid that. Summary. Cruising around the world, it's safer than living in Ottawa. You are literally safer in the middle of the Atlantic than you are driving on the Queensway. It's not an expensive thing to do. As I said earlier, you can buy yourself a small house, pay it off, and then cash it in and spend, $200,000 on a secondhand boat, spend $50,000 to $100,000 on equipping it or upgrading it, and then have $60K a year, which is about what it costs to cruise. Don't try and skimp on the annual allowance. It's nice to be able to go to dinner once a week, no matter where you are. It's nice to be able to hire a car and go for a drive from Durban up to Kruger, and stay in a few little hotels and see some of the world. Don't end up like a lot of people that we ran into that sailed from Fiji over to Vanuatu, and then sit on their boat for a week or two, and then sail from Vanuatu to New Caledonia, to Noumea, because they don't have any money to do anything ashore. The fun is not in the passages. The fun is being at the other end of the passage. The lifestyle is healthy, it's active, and it's great adventure. It's not great leisure. There's nothing terribly leisurely about it. It's a lot of work, but it is exciting, and it's a wonderful experience. And part of that is the wonderful people that you will meet. You'll meet a lot of people that have done something with their life that made this possible. You don't tend to find the filthy rich, You may run into them occasionally, with a big Swan 65 here or there, you know, with 2 or 3 crew. Mainly you'll find couples or families on a budget of sorts. You can easily plan to fund and do all this, learning the skills in 5 to 10 years. As long as you plan it and execute the plan. So if you want to go, just go do it. And that is that.
Wow, well, thank you very much, Sean. That was very, very interesting. And I know I'm motivated, especially as I'm looking out the window, seeing all that white stuff on the ground. So it's yeah, definitely in the plans. We had a couple of questions. One was with regards to insurance, boat insurance. Any recommendations on that front? I assume you got it, but and the other one was in regards to health insurance. How did you handle that?
And the answer is no and no. I initially, when I bought my boat, I had insurance through Lloyd's. I would not particularly recommend them. What I did was I got coastal insurance for Europe. And when I got down to the Canaries, I phoned them up to upgrade to cover the Atlantic crossing. And that was when they told me that I had to have 3 competent crew on board for the passage. Well, that's very difficult if you're going single hand. So I dropped insurance and basically sailed without insurance pretty well all the way. When I was in New Zealand, by the way, I worked, myself and my wife worked in New Zealand, Australia, and Hong Kong. And when we were there, we ended up getting local sailboat insurance, you know, the kind you'd have for the Ottawa River. But going offshore, I didn't carry insurance. I self-insured. I figured if my boat went down, then I was probably a goner too, and I wasn't going to need be able to make any insurance claims. But it depends on your budget. I was doing my circumnavigation was done. It wasn't a wealthy one. Okay, we ended up, as I said, working in New Zealand and Australia and Hong Kong and even Singapore to augment our funds. So we dispensed with the boat insurance. In New Zealand and Australia, we both had health insurance through the work we were doing, and that worked well. But the rest of the time, you pull in somewhere. If there's something wrong, you go and see a doctor, and you hand them a bunch of money. It's not a lot of money. It only gets to be a lot of money if they got to airlift you back to Canada or something like that. If you can afford it, get it. If not, don't. I was relatively young doing this. I was 40 at the time, and I was in very good health, as was my wife, who joined me. So we weren't too concerned. We did end up having the occasional little trip or run in with the healthcare system. But
You did.
yeah.
And what did you do that allowed you to work, you know, at various? places.
Want my secrets? Well, when I left Ottawa, I was working for Cognos in their product development group, and so my skills in computing were quite high. Also, I'd done a lot of consulting with the federal government and also with the BC government for a couple of years out on the West Coast. So when I got to New Zealand, I worked as a consultant, and Carolyn ended up consulting on accounting patch, implementing software accounting, both of which were quite lucrative. In New Zealand, essentially, both of us ended up being landed immigrants in New Zealand, so it was all legal and above board. In Australia, not quite so legal. We bought a shelf company and had the shelf company sell our services to the local business community. I ended up working for SO Australia on contract. Very lucrative, very nice, but a little bit on the risky side. Hong Kong was easier. If you got a job, you got a work permit. It's the way it worked there. And Singapore, pretty well the same. But the important thing is, you want to, if you're going to work, if you're going to try and finance your way around the world, you got to do something that actually accumulates money. You have to be able to save, and you're not going to do that in Fiji competing against Fijians. You're not going to do it in Papeete. You may be able to do a lot of it now online. That's certainly a boon to some people. But basically, you want to be able to do jobs that are lucrative. Something that's actually going to put money in the bank instead of just feeding you while you're in one place. We were quite fortunate to be able to do that. And it is there for other people to do. Some people existed by working on other cruising sailboats, but I found that really was not terribly lucrative. The only ones that seemed to make money at that were the people that knew refrigeration or diesel engine experts. Occasionally, electricians could make a decent buck doing that, but the cruising community is pretty tight with its money, so you're not going to make big bucks doing anything for them. Okay, yeah, you're much better off if you've got some kind of skill they can sell to the people that have money, the local companies and governments.
Yeah. Well, maybe in another couple of years there, with Elon Musk's satellites spread out all over up there in the sky, we'll be able to do more work from the boat wherever we are. So, another question came in here. Do you have an opinion or experience on fuel polishing?
Sorry?
Do you have any opinion or experience on fuel polishing?
Fuel polishing?
Yes.
I don't know what that is.
I'm not sure either.
So it's Victor here. So fuel polishing is a system of circulating your diesel fuel through a series of filters and then depositing the unused filter back in the tank. So it's a recirculating Parker or Raycor type system beyond just your typical 10 micron, 2 micron filter.
My engine had a return back to the tank for excess fuel. So it circulated to a certain extent, but I don't think it's really what you're talking about.
Right.
My system was just, my philosophy was get the best fuel you can and put it in the tank, load it up with conditioners, and filter the hell out of it on the back end. As I said, I had 3 different filters for my fuel to go through before it got to the engine. And that worked well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Did you have on your boat, did you have AIS? There's a question here. Would you recommend that? I mean, it's built into most VHF radios these days. So, I mean, I've had experience with it. I'm not sure if you have. I don't see a downfall. I think it's great.
No, I had no experience with it. If I was going, I'd probably add it to the list of things to put on. But as I said earlier, beware of relying too much on systems that expecting other people to see you. Okay, going up through Papua New Guinea, we're going through a channel, one of the big straits, and it's only about 10 miles wide. And up comes this gigantic coal freighter from Australia heading up to China or Japan. And Carolyn calls them up and on the VHF, which they had on, and says, hi, this is the yacht Spalpeen. How do we look on your radar? And he says, well, where are you? And we explained. He says, well, let me turn on the radar. You would think in crowded waters like that, or constrained waters, that these guys would have their radars on all the time, but a lot of times they don't. So, radar, our AIS is on all the time. I don't know, maybe, but keep a good watch out for yourself. Don't bet on other guys seeing you.
For sure. If you had to estimate, what percentage of motoring did you do versus sailing?
I didn't do very much motoring at all, except in one area, and that was the China Sea. The Philippines and the China Sea. From the time we got to, what was those straits? Straits of Mindanao, top of the island of Mindanao in the Philippines. From the time we got there till we went up through the islands, all up to Hong Kong, back down to Singapore, and actually from Singapore down to the Sunda Straits between Java and Sumatra. That was pretty well all motoring, no wind at all. And that's different years, different times a year. The winds were just not enough to drive you anywhere. So that was literally thousands of miles of motoring. The rest of it.
Yeah. And did you, while you were, like during your circumnavigation, were you often traveling with other cruisers in tandem, or were you pretty much, doing most of the cruising from point to point on your own?
It was mainly point to point on our own. I am not a fan of cruising in with groups of boats. Seems to me that if you're out there going from A to B with a bunch of boats, if you're going to hit something, the chances are it's going to be one of those other boats. So I preferred to go on ahead or go after. The exception to that was the race from Fiji to Vanuatu when we were out there with 30 or 40 other boats. And we saw some of those boats on the passage. Rely on yourself. Don't. I think it's a mistake for people to think that buddy boating is significantly safer than going on your own. My view was that it wasn't, and I moved certainly crossing the Pacific. It's a bit of a milk run, so you're running into the same boats in different anchorages or different harbors all across the 7,000 miles, but you're not necessarily going with them at the same time. I'd typically take off and say, hi guys, I'm off. See you in a few days in so-and-so, and just take off.
Right. Okay. Let me just have a look here if I see anything else coming in. If anybody has any further questions, now's the time. We did have one question come in here, and that was with regards to firearms. So I think I know the question to your answer, but did you personally carry them, or did you know other cruisers that carried them?
I knew other cruisers that carried them, and I knew I did not, and I would not recommend them. Some people carry shotgun, and they do it so they can carry flares, shotgun flares. Not a bad idea. But guns in general are a problem. When you go into some countries, they get awful nervous if you come in with guns. And you certainly don't want to come in with guns and not declare them to them. You do that and you're literally gun smuggling, and you're away for life in some hellhole. I give as an example of the whole gun thing. There was when I was cruising across the Pacific, there was an American lawyer who was a bit of a nutcase, my wife says. I was trying to think. He was a bit of a prepper, okay, if you're familiar with that phrase. And he set off from California with a couple of semi-automatic rifles and a handgun and a small machine gun. Okay, and he got to French Polynesia, and he declared them, and they immediately took them into custody, and he had to pay to have those guns shipped from the Marquesas to Papeete and then out to Bora Bora, where he picked them up 3 months later, okay, and put them on board. And there's a couple of things about that. One, it cost him a lot of money to do that. And the second thing is, you don't need guns out in the middle of the ocean. The only time you need them is when you're close to land. It's the pirates are all close to land. So having guns that are only available to you when you're on the ocean isn't a lot of use. Anyway, he came to that same conclusion. So when he left, Bora Bora, French Polynesia, and headed on to Fiji, he decided it was too much, and he dumped the handgun and the one of the automatic weapons and the machine gun or whatever. He dumped them overboard. He gets to Fiji. The time we were in Fiji was when the first of the Fiji Army coups took place. And this guy comes into harbor on this boat with guns, doesn't declare them, and they've received a report that he's carrying guns. Can't account for them. They pull his boat apart looking for the missing guns. 3 different occasions they pull the boat apart, determined to find them. And eventually he moves on to Vanuatu. They let him go, gets to Vanuatu. Well, the Vanuatuans, they know they're smarter than the Fijians, so they pull the boat apart as well. Look, stay away from guns, you know.
He had to sell the boat. Yeah, he had to sell the boat.
Yeah, he eventually sold the boat. It just became too much of a hassle because the boat was essentially cursed by having this report of guns on board. I did carry a flare gun, and I did wave it on a couple of occasions at people, probably innocent fishermen, but I wasn't prepared to let them come up alongside me and find out they weren't. So I took my flare gun and I pointed at them and kind of waved them away, and they took the hint and went. Flare gun, if you don't know what it is, it looks quite intimidating. And if you do know what it is really quite intimidating. Far more effective than a shotgun. You land a flare shot onto a wooden trawler and see what happens. You know, they're not going to put it out. You know, that phosphorus is just going to start burning everything around it, and you can't put it out by throwing water on it. It just keeps burning. So, as I say, I use that. I also carried some fishing net, polypropylene fishing net, that I could rig onto my fishing line and stream behind me. If somebody was chasing me, I could try and maneuver the boat to such that they had to actually go over it. If they did, they were in deep trouble. It would just clog up their propeller and, you know, render them engineless in effect. But I stayed away from guns. Guns are not a good thing to have.
Another question just came in here with regards to your, you know, probably on some of your longer passages. How did you handle, or what was your watch routine?
I like doing 3 hours on, 3 hours off with my wife. Occasionally, rare occasions, we'd have somebody else on board. Some of that was successful. Some was piss useless. Okay. 2 hours, I found 4 hours of sitting in the cockpit at night really, really difficult to stay awake. But I wanted to get a decent sleep when I was off watch. So I settled on 3 hours on, 3 hours off. During the day, the boat sails itself. You don't need anyone specifically on watch. Somebody's pretty well always reading in the cockpit. So it's only at night you actually have to have watches. There's probably still reading. Most of the alarms that you get or things that grab your attention are not lights at sea or anything like that. They're sounds. You hear some sound, and boats at sea are very noisy. They're rattling and banging and making a lot of noise all the time. And then you'll hear a ping, and it's not a usual sound, and it gets your attention like that. And in fact, when I was single-handing, it would get my attention when I was asleep. It would wake me up. That or the ship's movement changing. Instead of lolling over the waves at this kind of frequency, suddenly you're going like this. It wakes you. You become very attuned to your boat. A lot of times, whales and dolphins and things like that, you don't actually see them until you hear them.
Right. Yeah.
Quack and the dolphins are here, or you hear that's what you hear when there's a big whale going by. And as I say, you hear the noise, and it's different from all the noises on board, and it kicks off your radar.
Yeah. Upon entering different countries, did you ever come upon any surprises with regards to fees or bringing your sailboat into their waters? Coming into strange waters or countries, customs, or did that normally go pretty smoothly?
You first of all, you pretty well know ahead of time what you're coming into, okay? And word goes out across as you're cruising, not cruising alone. You're meeting people here, there, and everywhere, and you're picking up information. The amount you learn from other cruisers is really quite phenomenal, and you get these warnings, and some of them were really quite funny. Going into Australia, we were warned, oh, Jesus, they just tear your boat apart. They confiscate all your food and all the rest. Well, we pull into the Sydney Heads and got told to anchor in Watson's Bay near the mouth of the Sydney Harbor. And along comes this customs vessel. This big, tall guy calls to me, permission to come aboard? And I said, yeah, well, come on. And he hops aboard and sticks out his hand and he says, hi, I'm Robin. Bill said to say hello. Bill was a guy I'd been cruising with up in Fiji and Vanuatu. And he'd come through going back to Melbourne and met with his mate, Robin, who was a circumnavigator who worked for customs, and said, watch out for Sean and Carolyn. So we didn't have anything confiscated. We didn't have any bad experience there. There was, in some of the smaller islands, you'll have some of the the customs or local officials try and rip you off. We got ripped off, or a guy tried to rip us off in Santa Cruz in the Solomon Islands. And this guy was notorious. And, we paid the harbor fee, but he didn't have any change. So he took the money and vanished. So anyway, we got ashore, went to the local bakery, bought some bread and got some change. And Carolyn goes up to the customs office, knocks and barges in, and demands our change back. Here, give us that $20 back, and got away with it. Another one was when we got to Cebu in the Philippines. They have lots of little offices that you have to check into. Now, we'd been in the Philippines for a couple of months before we made it to Cebu, which was the first port of entry. And we went to see this customs or harbor master or whatever. And he informed us that we needed to have a de-ratting certificate. And this is a certificate that shows that you have no rats on board, okay? And it was going to cost us $10 US. So we reluctantly paid him $10 US, and he handed us the de-ratting certificate. And Carolyn says to him, "Aren't you going to inspect the boat?" And he said, "Why?" "Well, to certify that there aren't rats on board." And he looks at her and he says, "Do you have rats on board?" And she says, "Of course not." He says, "Well, not necessary." The other thing that was kind of funny was in going through customs and immigration in a lot of these countries, they can be quite big on stamps, okay? And I recommend that anyone that's going offshore has a boat stamp, registered vessel 69350, Canada, Ottawa, flag of the country on it. And when we were in Hong Kong, we actually got a couple of them made. And I used to love going to places to check in. You'd fill out the forms, and then they'd take them and they'd stamp them. And when they stamped them, I'd pull out my stamp and I'd go, stamp. And occasionally, the other guy would then reach into another drawer, pull out another stamp, and stamp it. And I'd pull out another stamp and stamp it as well. It really made them feel, that everything was really official, So anyway, the other a couple of amusing things, we pulled into Durban and were greeted by this young customs officer. He was odd, this guy. And I'm chatting him up, making small talk. And I said, "And what kind of problems do you have in your business?" Expecting him to tell me about, that there were people smuggling marijuana and the like into the country. And instead he starts telling me about all the bitches he has with the guys in his office, his management problems.
And pornography.
And I said, "Well, but what about contraband things?" And he said, "Oh, yeah," he says, "we just last week raided the one ship and found all these playboys and hustlers." And that was the extent of what they were looking for. It was really quite bizarre. The other place I was warned about was going into the USA. That again, they rip your boat apart and all the rest. And we came into the USA at Galveston and on the Gulf Coast. And we came in the middle of the night, and we came in after sailing right across the and being inspected daily by a DEA plane. Okay, come down and buzz us in effect, and and the Caymans we had sniffer dogs on board, and anyway, we get to Houston or Galveston, and we come in the middle of the night. Okay, dock. We called into on the VHF, found out where we were supposed to dock, and found the dock and docked there, and went to sleep. And the following morning, there's this bang, bang, bang of boots on the deck. We come out, and there's 4 really scruffy-looking characters on board. No uniforms, no nothing. Okay, and they say their customs, and I welcome them on board. And they said, "Where have you been?" And I said, "Well, around the world." And they said, the guy I said it to goes, "Ha!" He says, he turns his head to one of the other guys and says, "Just like the Albacores." And I said, "Yeah, just like the Albacores." And he goes, "You know the Albacores?" I said, "Oh, yeah, I know them very well. We helped them out in Fiji and sailed with them through Vanuatu and down to Australia, and helped them when they got beaten up in the crossing to Tasman." And he says, "Oh," he says, "their son works with us." "Okay, bye." That was the end of that ripping apart. So there's lots of scary stories out there. There's lots of scares about pirates. The only viable pirate story I know of, when in the group I was cruising with, was one boat where they were attacked in the Philippines, in Manila Bay, and they were attacked and robbed by the Coast Guard. And the Coast Guard was actually, they caught them, and they were prosecuted. The rest is all hearsay. People like me run into situations where there's somebody following them, and they get uneasy. That occurred to me on 3 different occasions. But whether they were pirates or people just curious, I don't know. I took actions to avoid finding out that they were pirates.
Right. Okay, I think we are coming to a close here as far as questions. I'm just scrolling down here quickly one more time. We're also come up to our 2-hour mark, so the timing is perfect. I want to thank you very, very much, Sarah, Sean. It was most informative, very entertaining. I hope you've inspired, I'm sure, a number of people that have participated this evening. And we're really, really looking forward to your next presentation, which is going to get, I guess, more into your specific route, and the specific destinations, and talking about some of those. So more of a travel log type style, I guess. Yes. So that is going to be, for people that don't know, I'll just remind you, that's going to be on January 28th at 7 p.m. If you haven't registered, please do so through the Ottawa Sailing Meetup. Otherwise, thank you for everyone to joining us, and we'll see you hopefully on January 28th. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good
Bye-bye.
night.
Thanks.
Leave meeting.